Well, thanks for coming out, everybody who's here. I'm glad it's actually, I don't know, I'm torn. An intimate crowd is nice. Lots of people make you nervous, you know. Thanks to everybody for participating, Mike, for doing music with, and DJ for recording, so I can say hi to Mom. Hi, Mom. For those who don't know me, my name is Robin. And I'm here tonight just to tell my story. I'm not here to give any lessons on anything, but I just wanted to share what happened to me in my life, and maybe it would be an encouragement to people who have gone through similar things, or who in a lot of cases, people just don't realize there's other worlds out there that are right underneath our nose. So I've called it a tale of threes, because as I was going through what I was going to say, I found out a lot of things came up in three. And I thought, what the heck, let's go with it. So first of all, I've got my three amigos here tonight. Wasn't planning on that part, but I've got three moms and three dads. I don't know, anyone else here got three moms and three dads? No? Well, it happens. I've been married 3 times, and I've lived 3 different lives completely. And I'll start by saying I've come to be interested in ancient history, and people are people whenever you go. You know, my story, you know, some people might look at me and say, oh, he's an old dude, you know, that happened a long time ago. But I mean, things in the world change, but people don't change. They use different kinds of drugs. The women they sleep with wear different clothes. They listen to different music. But, you know, the Roman Empire in their days, which was, you know, if you think about it, over 2,000 years ago, we're talking 56 generations. Like, that's a long time ago, and they got drunk and stupid just like people today do. And every generation thinks they've invented this stuff, but it's been going on as long as man has been on the earth. So in my story, you know, the drugs and whatever that happened are different than are being used today. You know, I didn't use a lot of the drugs that are common today, but we certainly had our share. So I'll start out with my childhood because it was unique in itself. My mom became pregnant in the 60s, and being pregnant in the 60s was not a good thing if you weren't married. And she was told in no uncertain terms that child was going to be given up for adoption. And she was sent off to the Salvation Army's Home for Unwed Mothers, just so that she wouldn't shame the family. I found all this information out many years later, but at that time I was given up for adoption. And the story goes, I was with a family for some time, and then the guy got hit by a train. That's the story I got. So I was given up for adoption again, and I was adopted at the age of 1 year old by a conservative couple who had immigrated from European culture, and they got this kid who they just weren't ready for. That kid didn't listen. That kid was into everything. That kid, I don't know, I guess I was just one of those kids. And they didn't know what to do with that kid, and from a very young age. I guess in talking to some people who, you know, counseled them back in the day, they were instructed, well, if Robbie's going to be a bad boy, just send him in, put him in his room for a little while. Well, it turned out to be a thing. I remember being segregated from my very earliest memories as a child, that I wasn't allowed to play with the other siblings, that they adopted some other children after me. They had one of their own. And I remember being segregated from my earliest memories. I have memories of before kindergarten, certainly. And by the time I was in kindergarten, I was being locked in my bedroom. So in those days, in the early times, I was still taking meals in the kitchen. I had a separate desk by the window. I wasn't allowed to sit at the table with the rest of the family. I wasn't allowed to take meals with them. I wasn't allowed to talk. And if I wasn't locked in my room, they had me standing in the corner, or facing the back kitchen door. And they decided that if Robbie's standing around all this time, he needs to get some exercise. So my exercise was to be walking on the spot. So I would just be standing there marching on the spot. And because that little boy, he wants to see what's going on, well, now we're going to put a bag over his head. So here we have a little boy who at that time, I remember this very clearly, he being very small, standing facing the back door with a bag over my head and walking on the spot for hours. And then there was other things that I had to do. If it was, a nice summer day, that they would send me outside to play, and I was supposed to go, over there on the edge of the farm. And then at one point, the old man came out one day, and he was really angry for some reason. I don't know, somebody saw me or what happened, but he dragged me out in the bush, and he said, "This is where we want you to play. We don't want to see you." So I ended up running out into the bush every day. So I remember getting up, and she'd give me a bottle of lemonade and a bag lunch, and I'd run out to the bush, and she'd call me home when it got dark, and I'd get locked up in my room, and that was my life. From there, we moved to another town, and there wasn't a bush there. And at that point, they stopped serving me meals at the table. So at that point, she started bringing my meals up, and I had on my desk a little tin pie plate and a margarine container, and those were my dishes, and a plastic fork. And she would unlock the door. I'd hold my margarine container out, and I'd drink my drink, and then my plate, and she'd dump the food in there. She'd lock the door, and once again, I wasn't allowed to talk. She'd often slap me and say, "That's for nothing. Wait till you do something." I don't know if they thought they would keep me in line with that, or the lady was my jailer, more or less. I had a pail in the corner so I could relieve myself, and because of that, and because of the fact that I lived in there all the time, it got cold, it got smelly in there. So in the wintertime, I had to have the window open. So here's a small boy who's locked in a room in the winter with the window open, and I remember that I'd have to wear the same clothes all the time. So what the routine would be, I did go to school, so that was some relief because it kept me a little bit sane. The routine would be I'd come home from school, and I'd get undressed at the back door, and then I'd have to march upstairs, and then step out of my shoes into my room, and then get dressed with the clothes that were in there. And I'd wear those same clothes for the whole year. And in the wintertime, I remember my sleeve on my sweater getting all crusty, and just random things like this that happened to me. I remember the linoleum floor getting so cold that the linoleum would curl up on the edge. And I remember the pail in the corner getting ice on it. And that was just my life. I grew up like that. So from the time, my earliest memories until I left, that was life at home. Wasn't allowed to talk, wasn't allowed to touch anything. I had to work on the farm sometimes, but the one thing I have to say that saved my life, I think, and my sanity, was that in the summertime, they sent the kid to summer camp. So off I go to summer camp. In the beginning, in grade 2, I remember it was a couple of weeks. I was on this farm, and then as time went on, it turned into, the whatever the summer camp life is, whether it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks. So for each of these lives that I lived, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I knew God. So as a small boy, living pretty much in the forest for quite some time before, we moved from there, and then being in my room alone, there was just me and the world I was in. And that, coupled with exposure to summer camp, it left me with an understanding that there was a God. And I lived with that God. He was in, the Bible talks about how God is in the creation. You cannot but look at creation and see the Lord. So I often, spiders were my friends. I had a lot of fun with spiders. I remember having a little spider in my window. It seemed like every year the same guy was back. And there was a point in my life where when I was outside, I was supposed to be under this building and stay there so nobody could see me. And I remember watching the spiders spin webs, and I could watch in the spring the grass come up and watch it grow each day. And as life around me was, so was God. And even in the nighttime when I'd be waiting for her to call me home, and the stars would come out and the moon would rise, and it would just be me and God. And that's what it was. But I did know what it was to be alone. I was utterly and completely alone, except for that God that I knew. I did not understand love. I did not know what love was. I could not experience love. And I didn't know it at the time, but I learned later on in life as I looked back that I certainly must have been afraid. I was a small boy and alone in a lot of places, and being domineered over and knocked around. And I didn't think I was, because I grew up that way and that's the way it was, I didn't know any better. So I felt that's the way it was. It was the way it was for me anyways. So that was my existence, and I thought I was happy. But, looking back now, I remember one of my counselors saying years later, Robbie, you can't expect me to believe that that woman did that to you and that you were okay with that it made me think, I must have been afraid. But certainly there was just me and the God of the universe, the God of creation. And then there was the fact that I was super alone and didn't know love at all. Not at all. I had no feeling for anyone. So that was my first life. That lasted until I got to high school. So, as it is when kids get high school age, they start to change a little bit. I have a 13-year-old daughter here today. Thanks for coming out, Sophie. She's not even in high school. But anyway, I got to high school and I talked to a girl because girls were interesting. And she went home and told her mom. And then her mom said, well, if he's telling the truth, he has to talk to somebody at school. So I remember I had my bread and butter that morning. It was March. So her habit was to go at night, she'd go up the stairs and it was just bread and butter, and she'd put it on the top post of the steps, and she'd go to bed, and in the morning, you hear that sound, the lock coming off the door, and I'd wake up, and I'd get out of bed, she'd give me my bread and butter, and she'd lock the door and go back downstairs. And that morning, while I was eating my bread and butter, I wrote a one-page on two sides, just a sheet like this, both sides, a day in the life of myself, and gave it to the guidance teacher when I got to school. Paul Loveday was his name. He ended up doing a missions thing in Africa, was a good guy, had a very deep voice and a thick black beard. And anyway, he read this letter, and he brought me into his office, and he asked me some questions. And then he called the Children's Aid, and as it was called in those days, they call it Family and Children's Services now. And two fine young ladies came over. I remember their names were Fran and Leanne. And I was 14 years old, and I was in high school. And they came over and gave me a few questions. And then I was very sure to tell them which room was mine, because I didn't get on the bus and go home that day. And I was terrified. And so they had the family that had adopted me. They had adopted a couple other kids, and they had a different life than I did. I really don't know what their life was like. I have since, I have tried to reach out to them, and those are separate stories. I'm in touch with my sister right now. She's involved with a motorcycle club, and the other boy ended up getting into forgery and all kinds of stuff and is hiding from people in motorcycle clubs. But anyway, lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. So I was like, this is my room, you go up the stairs and that's the one. Don't go, if they tell you it's that room or that room, don't, So they went over and they investigated and they found the room, and that was it. I never went back. It was over, just like that. They put me in a receiving home. I was in a receiving home for 2 weeks, and I remember they had a cat. That was the first time I interacted with a cat, and that was pretty cool. And then I went to another receiving home, or not a receiving home, to my first foster home. And they weren't ready for me either. It was a nice place too. It was a horse farm. It could have worked out. It would have been nice. But I had no social skills whatsoever. And I didn't, they had younger children than me, and I behaved inappropriately, and that didn't work out. So then they put me in with my next home where things worked out. So that was Ed and Adrian. I like to call them Mom and Dad. And they still are Mom and Dad to me today. The first couple, that was George and Minnie. So if I refer to George and Minnie, Minnie died eventually, and I did make peace with George, and that's a whole nother story if we have time. But anyway, I ended up with Ed and Adrian, and started my life, my free life. And I always talk about when I got out. So when I got out, there was this world that I was not prepared for. First of all, the music was crazy. I remember hearing ELO's Don't Bring Me Down for the first time, and it was like, it just blew my mind. It was like, this is from another planet. And rock and roll was king. So when I got out, it was 1980. So it was the beginning of the 80s, and a lot of great music came out in the 80s, and I love music, and I'm still a great music fan today. I'm kind of locked into the 80s music, but so there was music first of all, and then there was I wasn't much for alcohol in the beginning, because I argued that when you drink alcohol, you forget things, you can't walk straight, you can't think straight, you fall down, and that's no good. It's much better smoking pot, because you just get the buzz and you can still maintain a fair bit of control. But so there was drugs, which was another thing that I wasn't prepared for. Had never heard of drugs, didn't know what drugs were. They didn't talk about drugs in school in those days. So I started smoking up, and then there was girls. So then there was sex. We got all the three major components here: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I was 15 years old when I got out. Well, I was 14. I had my first birthday with Ed and Adrian. And I remember I wanted a stuffed animal, because I'd never had a stuffed animal all my life. And got my first stuffed animal. It was a monkey we called Simeon. That's another story. But anyway, I know Ed and Adrian, I know they loved me, and they still do. And I remember the first time they hugged me, and I was like, what are these people? They're touching me, like it was, I didn't know love. But I liked the girls. And I became active immediately. I was still 14 years old the first time I was involved with a girl. And I just continued through high school. So I became one of these we were potheads. We were called heads in those days. You had the heads, and then you had the jocks, and then you had the normal people, and the whatever. So I became very promiscuous in high school. I don't know if I was popular or not, but I mean, in our group there wasn't so much popularity through the school, but I mean, I know I had my share of action already through high school. I can't even guess how many girls I was involved with, and we were always stoned. And the thing was, I started to have this struggle that, the whole feeling of being alone. Okay, I had a home where they cared about me, but then there was this thing about this relationship with God. So I had known who God was, and I had believed and understood the message of Jesus and salvation. But you know what? Now I'm in this world that has all these things to offer, and it's so much fun. And it was a struggle for me. I wanted to be a good Christian. I wanted to do what was right. But you know what? There's this girl, and there's this party, and I got drugs, and I'm not going to throw these out. Are you crazy? And you know what I did a few times? I remember throwing drugs off the bridge on Parkson Road in Woodstock at Southside Park, and going back a day later, and I'm like, I know that cap was red. And I found the thing. I remember dropping them down the sewer grate, and I'd come back a week later with a crowbar and crack the thing. There it is. That's a green cap, So I knew I wanted to, and I was going to church stoned, and I went to youth group once on acid, and it was just crazy, and I was struggling all the time. I know this is the truth, and I know that the Lord has a plan for me in my life, and I know that He I understood the plan of salvation, and I knew God growing up, but this is too much fun. And it was torture. I struggled with this for years, and I couldn't talk about it. I mean, who am I going to talk to about this? I just keep going to youth group and keep going to church and being the good little Christian boy on the surface, but then, get me downtown or whatever. So I moved out before my 18th birthday. The Children's Aid, they said at 18 you can move out on your own, you're considered an adult. And I argued, well, my birthday's in October. If I move out during the summer, I got school in the fall and I'll be all settled. So I was 17 years old. So I figured I learned everything I needed to know in 2 years at my foster parents' place. Which, I'd barely learned anything. I'd learned how to use a knife and fork at the table, and I'd learned how to lie and fool people, but I still really had no social skills. I still didn't care about anybody. I had no understanding of what love was, and I was living a double life. So I struggled and it was terrible. I was like, I know this God, and I'd be partying one day and then begging for forgiveness the next, and it just went on and on and on, and it tore me apart. So I was 14 when I got out. I became 20 years old, and I had met a girl through a series of circumstances. I had been working at a truck stop in Woodstock, where I'm from, and that was a great place to work because we were always high and we had great connections with the truck drivers. And I met this girl living in a van across the street with my drug dealer. So this guy everybody knew was the local dealer, he had somehow ended up living in this van at the garage. And somehow my first wife, she had ended up she was 16 years old. She'd been thrown out of her mom's place. She'd been thrown out of her dad's place. Mom and dad had separated, obviously. Her dad was a guy who grew up running hotel bars and stuff like that, and he ran a band. So I don't know what kind of life Angela had growing up, but she was 16 when I met her, and I managed to find her a place to live. Actually, it was with Mike LeClaire. So Mike LeClaire was one of these guys who had a big heart for guys like I, who was struggling. And I remember living at Mike LeClaire's place, and on my 19th birthday, Mike gave me a Thompson Chain Reference Bible, one of the best Bibles you can get. At the time, it cost $90, I think. And my friends, they gave me a pud of cocaine, which is 2.5 grams of coke. So in one hand, I got a brand new Bible, and the other hand, I got a pud of cocaine, and I'm like, happy birthday, welcome to my life. Anyways, I had moved out of Mike's place at that point, but Angela needed help, and I got talking to Mike, and Mike helped her out. So anyway, I ended up with Angela, and I remember distinctly, the day I was coming out of the TD Bank in my hometown, and I was turning left on one of the main streets, and she said something to me, and I thought, you know what? I'm tired of this struggle. I'm just so tired of this struggle. I'm always with the guilty conscience, and always with the, it was just always the guilty conscience, trying to get to church. And you know what? I'm like, I'm tired of this. If I'm gonna go to hell, I'm gonna go to hell. I'm going no conscience from here on in. So that's what I did. Okay, no conscience from here on in. So I was 21 years old, and I had with Angela, we had a shotgun wedding. My first son was born because I was in college at the time. I learned my trade. I'm a sign maker by trade. I always enjoyed art, and that's sort of a side story, but I had always enjoyed art. Used to paint jean jackets in high school. In fact, my nickname, when I moved out and I moved downtown, when I got out of my foster parents' place and moved downtown to start my life, I didn't want to be robbed because I was boring, And I always had this relationship with spiders, so I did this painting on the back of my jean jacket, spider. And I went downtown, I introduced myself as Spider, and that was it. That stuck. So from then on in, after I'd met Angela and we got into this party life, and Eric was born. Eric is 34 years old now. And Eric was born, and we ended up living in Barrie, which is quite a bit bigger town than my hometown. And then Evan was born. Evan is now, what is Evan? I think he just turned 30 maybe. But I didn't love Angela. I didn't understand love. But I do remember the first time I experienced this, and Eric was like 2 years old, maybe 3. And suddenly I'm sitting in my living room, and there's this little kid, and I'm like, I have feelings for this human being. This is weird. And by then I must have been 25, well, maybe not 25, 23, 24. I don't know. I was in my early 20s. I'm not good at math, or you can figure that out. But I know it was the early 90s, and there was Eric, and I was like, what am I going to do now? I have a feeling for another human being. But I didn't have those feelings for my wife. We got married because she was pregnant, and that's what you did in those days. And I still had a bit of a facade going on with the church because I was still involved with my parents. So things obviously didn't work out. I was still angry. I was angry because in those days I was starting to realize that I had been ripped off. I was angry because I had been sort of forced into a marriage and a fatherhood that I didn't really want. I went from, one day I was in college and living in Toronto and partying my face off. And the next day, I'm married and I have a kid and I have a job. So we had this huge row one day, and I came home from work and the house was empty. She took the furniture, she took the knives and forks and everything. I walked into an empty house, and that was a bit of a shock, but whatever, I can adapt. I've done it before. And it didn't take long that, of course, I was still working, and she took off. And so any money that I had was mine. I did make efforts and put money in her bank, and she lied about it in court and all that stuff. So that's another side story. We've had those battles, some of us, with courts and children and misery, what goes with that. But because I did want to do the right thing. But anyway, I had money and I had a house, and I would hang around downtown more. And in the city of Barrie, it's a lot of people, and I always prided myself in being a bit of a chameleon, and I enjoyed, I still enjoy acting, and I discovered that, I can go to a different bar every night and be a different person every night and meet all kinds of cool people, and no one in a town like that, you can hide very easily. Anyways, it wasn't long before I had people living in my house that might as well help them pay the rent and whatever. So I had college kids living upstairs, and I had guys on welfare, and I had guys that were involved with who knows what. I know they used to find stuff that they didn't steal, but it was, and then there were guys that were involved in bike clubs that were there, and my house became party central. So. And actually, there's a whole other sideline there where I got involved in witchcraft because I still have this relationship with God, sort of, kind of. I believe in God. I still know there's a God, just like Satan knows there's a God. But I have decided that if I'm going to be in this world, I need power. And, for those of you who don't know about those sorts of things, if you believe in God, and if you believe in the power of God, and if you believe in the power of angels, you must surely believe in the power of his demons. And I always say to people, Satan was a demon who actually was powerful enough, or is powerful enough, that he challenged God. So there's no saying that there's not power there. And I remember praying for power. And I remember weird stuff that happened. I remember the first time it happened, I was still in my hometown because I started this quite early. And I remember I was going to visit one of the girls, and I was walking behind someone. I was telling this person to turn left just to try it out, And the person turned left. And I thought, now they're going left anyway, right? So I come up to the street that they're on, and they had walked down the street, 50 or 60 feet, and they had stopped. So I thought, well, that's weird. So I turned left, and I'm going to see what's going on. So I walked, and I passed this person, and they were just standing there. And you can go now. And they turned around and went the other way. So that's the first time it happened to me. And I thought, well, that's pretty trippy. And then I found out later on in life, when I was running the house in Barrie, that it was just handy getting people to do stuff that you wanted to do. And I was reading cards, and I remember that people were always amazed by that. And I was like, card reading is an interesting thing because you're not using, like, I mean, it's literally like reading a book. This card is in this place, and it means that. So you just read the cards. And then there were other things that were happening, like I could hear them. I could hear them. I could hear them. And there were nights when the girls would wake up screaming, and they would swear that something was sitting on them. And I'm like, go to bed and go back to sleep. And anyways, it was a time, and all these people living there, and I know what it's like. I know what it's like to wake up. First of all, you might not even know where you are. You might be with people that you've never met before, because I used to black out when I walked out of the clubs all the time. 2 o'clock in the morning, closing time, you walk out on the street, you black out, and you'd wake up somewhere. You might wake up in the tank, you might wake, the drunk tank being like in jail, you might wake up at home, or you might wake up in somebody's apartment, and you'd be like, where's my clothes? Where am I? Is there a bus? Who are you? Hi, I'm Spider. Nice to meet you. It was weird. And then there's mornings you'd wake up and you'd be like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this in the world, if you've ever lived this life, but your whole skin is just crawling, and you're sweaty, and your head is just pounding, and then you've got to be sick. And the more you throw up, the more your head pounds, and then you have the shits. So you have to turn around, and you're sitting on, and it's just so horrible feeling. And then you're looking in the mirror, and you're like, and you still know there's a God. And you know that you're not serving him. You know that he's watching you. And you know how he's watching you? Because he's got these people that show up in your life and say, hey man, what about this? What about that? I remember I applied to the adoption registry to find out who my mom was in those days. And I'd never done it because I knew if I do it, I would find my mom. So I did, and I found my mom. And guess what? Mom's a pastor's wife. Of course she is. That's just the way it goes. And I knew that my mom, my foster mom, Adrian, I knew she was praying for me. And so when I met my mom, who was married to a pastor, her name's Lorraine, and she's my other mom that I have now. So those are the 3 moms I referred to. There was my adoptive mom, my foster mom, and my birth mom, who I met when I was in my 20s. So mom and Dave got married. Dave's a pastor. I have a brother, or a half brother, you would say, in these times. And I'd be hitchhiking somewhere, and I'd meet some Christian guy. I'd be in these random places, and God would show up, and I knew God was watching me. And you know what? I'd made my decision, and I was scared, and I was still alone. I was in this life where there was people in my house all the time. And it got sketchy. It got a little bit too much for me. I wasn't ready for this. I'm all about a good time. I liked it. I liked it that women would just walk into my bedroom and take their clothes off. I didn't even know them. I enjoyed it. But you know what? There was something lonely and sort of locked in fear that wouldn't go away, because I know my Bible. I knew it very well from the times I grew up, and I remember this verse that says, anyone who's involved in drunkenness and witchcraft and idolatry and so on and so forth, there's no place for them. And I was doing every single one of these things, and I'm like, well, there's that whole thing that you can't lose your salvation, and I don't know about that, because this verse says if you're doing all this stuff, so I'm like, I'm going to hell, and now hell isn't so appealing, because I've done all that stuff that I wanted to do, and you know what? It's just, at this point, it's just starting to creep me out. And these guys that are showing up in my life now, people are getting older, and they're getting more violent people. I remember waking up one day, it was 3 a.m, and I'm coming out, and there's guys there I'd never met before, and they've got guns on the table and a brick of hash the size of a book, and I'm like, hey guys, how's it going, and I'm going back to bed, nice meeting you, and I'm like, where did these guys come from? I hope, the cops don't show up. And just things like that were just it was getting too much. I remember another low point was I wanted to eat something, and I went to the fridge, and all there was frozen vegetables, that, like the frozen, the little cubey ones, with the carrots and the peas and the corn, and that was there, and there was eggs. So I made an omelet with this frozen vegetables and it was like the worst thing I'd ever eaten. And I'm like, there's nothing else to eat. And I'm like, these guys are eating me out of house and home, and I was angry as well, still, because I had, I don't know why I was so angry. I still didn't love people. I remember I came home, so I'd get a little violent once in a while. I came home one morning and I was really mad that the guys hadn't cleaned up the house, and I went through the house with a machete and woke them all up with the machete, just screaming in their face to clean up the house. And they cleaned up the house that day, but that's probably not the way to get things done. But that's the way I was. And I was drunk and on cocaine and still in my leather coats, 7 o'clock in the morning, waking these guys up. So then other things started happening to me. And this is where I attribute to the three women who were praying for me. That would be my foster mom and my birth mom and my Aunt Janet. So my Aunt Janet is another figure. She was related to the ones that raised me. And when relatives used to visit, they used to let me out of my room and try to pretend that everything was normal, but of course you can't pretend when that sort of weird thing is going on. And Janet and Herman always kind of knew, but I had somehow made a connection with Aunt Janet early on. Really great woman, still alive today. Love her to bits. And so I think it was their prayers that did this, because the first thing that happened was I woke up one morning and I didn't want to steal anymore. And that was weird, because stealing was always a very handy way to get stuff. I was never like a major thief like these guys I knew that used to hook up truckloads of stuff and whatever, but I stole small things. I liked stealing jewelry, and I liked, it was ever convenient. But anyway, I woke up that day and I was like, I just don't feel like stealing anymore. And it was weird. I even gave some stuff back that I'd stolen, and people thought, what's wrong with you? Because that was kind of different. And then another day I woke up and I didn't want to do acid and coke anymore. And I thought that was weird, because acid was a great trip. You'd be up all night, and coke was just like the most awesome feeling in the world. And I was like, well, I had enough of that. Don't want to do that. But then the weirdest thing that happened was I woke up one morning and I didn't want to sleep with women anymore. And that was just weird. That was just, to me, the most completely bizarre thing, because that was the thing that I enjoyed the most. And if I had 3 awake, it wasn't enough. It was just, why would I not want to do that anymore? And I puzzled over that, and I puzzled over that. And I was getting kind of tired of this life. I was like, you know what? I wanted to party. I remember back in the day, when I was 15, 17, and I wanted to smoke pot, but I had to go to church, and I was like, I've been down this, I did the roller coaster ride, and I'm done, so done. And my body was starting to, you start to cave in, as I call it. You're coming home from work and you're going to sleep, so you can get up at 10 or 11 o'clock and keep up with things, so you can go back to bed at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning and get up and go to work again. And you're not eating properly, and you're drinking all the time, and you're smoking dope, and you're smoking cigarettes, and you're doing whatever else you're doing, and plus there's all the guilt feelings, in spite of the fact that I didn't want to have a conscience. I still am standing in front of the mirror every day and looking at this guy who knows what's going on. I knew the truth. So I just had enough. And I think I still believe that was the prayers of those women and my foster dad as well, because there's just, to me, there's no way I didn't want to do that. It just happened. And so I decided, you know what? I told everybody on one day, I said, guys, at the end of the month, you're all on your own. I'm going to give notice. Good luck. And I just left. I just went into hiding. I changed personalities again. So what I did was, I was still in Barrie at the time. I just changed the community that I hung out with. I started getting involved with the art community, and I joined the writers club, and I, much more laid back sort of sense. And I started toning down on my activities, and I met another woman. So, and I joined AA because they said, if you want to quit drinking, you got to join AA. So I'm like, okay, I got to join AA. So I joined AA, and that's where I met my second wife. She was somehow involved in the Writers Club, and she was also in AA. And that was a sort of a short-lived part of my life. There was a transition part. So I always called Angela my party wife, and I always called Leslie my recovery wife. And in spite of the fact I say it was a short period of time, it was probably, the whole thing spanned probably 5 years. I met her, I had stopped sleeping with other women, and I remained loyal to her and have to this day, remarkably somehow, I don't know. That's the Lord's doing, I'm sure. That we started to, sort of toning the lifestyle back, and then as it happens, because I think the Lord works in us, in the world around us as well. So the industry that I'm in was changing at the time. So I had left the house and all that action behind, and I think it was 5 months later that I lost my job. And I, with a really good company, had a great position, but printing technology had come out. And we had done many, many things by hand since the 80s. And I was replaced by a machine, basically. They could print a billboard in 5 hours in Toronto instead of paying a painter 3 days to do it. Because what I used to do was paint billboards by hand, and all up and down Highway 401 and Highway 11, Barrie area, and the surrounding area, Aurelia, Huntsville. Anyway, I lost my job, so now I had quit this life, met Leslie. Then the thing happened with my job, so there was this series of events that brought me to Pembroke, because my manager had lost his job at the same time because of a big restructuring, and he bought a billboard plant up here. And he calls me one day and he says, listen, Rob, you want to start a sign company? I got 60 billboards I'm going to sell advertising on. You can come up here and produce billboards for me, and I'll do sales and leasing, and you can do production just like we did in Barrie. And I'm like, okay, I'm not doing anything. So up to Pembroke I come with Leslie, and still going to AA, still trying to quit drinking. Eventually quit smoking pot. Smoking pot and all those other, the drugs that I was doing, they had sort of lost their way when I got to Pembroke, because I didn't have any connections anymore. I was like, well, I could probably go hang out downtown and find stuff, but I mean, it was, it had lost its appeal and it wasn't urging me, but I could still, just go to the liquor store, buy a case of whatever, and go to a club. And so that was a bit of a struggle. And because of the influence of AA, I started hearing these echoes of God again in my life. And it was, it's the higher power thing, and for me, of course, higher power was always our Lord Jesus, the one who died for our sins, the God of creation. And I was hearing these echoes and being drawn back to church, and I was like, I kind of knew it was the right thing to do, and I didn't really want to, but I think I will. It was one of these things. I wasn't really keen on it, but I was sort of, I probably should, and whatever. And I ended up going and checking a few different churches out just to feel it, And I was at Calvary Baptist Church here in Pembroke, where I attend now, and the pastor at the time was Dan Bigger, and his wife's name was Joan, or is Joan. And we had coffee tea after church one night, and we were striking up a conversation, and I was like, so where are you from? And she's like, I'm from St. Catharines. And I was like, oh, that's cool. My mom, she's also from St. Catharines. She's a pastor's wife too. And Joan says, oh, well, what's your mom's name? I said, well, her name is Lorraine Topping now, but it used to be Lorraine Woodhouse. And Joan's like, she drops her mouth open. It turns out, check it out, that when my mom was 25, and my mom was involved with people in bike clubs in St. Catharines, that Dan and Joan were running a drop-in center, much like this one, in St. Catharines, And my mom went from the clubhouse to the drop-in center and met Dan and Joan. And Dan and Joan led my mom to the Lord when my mom was 25. And now here I am in Pembroke standing in front of Dan and Joan. I don't know how many years later it would have been. And discovering this. So I met Dan and Joan. So it was in those times that Leslie left. I never loved her either. I don't know if Leslie loved me. I don't really know. I didn't understand love. I still am challenged with the whole feeling of love these days, as I've joked with my associates here about, and maybe you can understand a little better now why. But these guys always tell me they love me, and I'm like, yeah, I know. Anyway, where was I going? Oh yeah, so I met Dan and Joan, and I hung out with Dan and Joan for a couple of years, almost exclusively. I didn't have any connections downtown or on the street. I didn't really know anyone at church yet. I was, only had been in business here in Pembroke at that time. So by then it was 3 years in Pembroke already. So this whole transition period took a little while before I healed enough that I began to live again for the Lord. Not that I ever really lived for Him. When I was a kid, I lived with Him. When I was partying, I lived against Him. And I guess I started living for Him at that time. So since then, that's over, well, we're pushing 30 years here now that this has been going on, that I changed. I swore I would never get back on a motorcycle, and I met some of these guys. But it's been a very interesting journey. I met my current wife, and I have 3 beautiful children that are boys, and 1 beautiful child that is a girl. I had 4 boys, 5 boys. What did I have? What do I have? 4 boys and a girl. I have 5 kids. I'm on the spot. Anyway, Lewis is 17, Leo is 15, Sophie is 13, and then my older kids. And it's just been this is what I call my normal life. So this is into my 3rd life now. I had my childhood life where I was locked up, and then I had my party life where my skin ended up crawling, and now I have what we call a normal life. So it took a long time to transition. I mean, I'm in business. I have my own business, and I interact with people a lot. I think I met my current wife. She came into shop to get a sign made. One of the things that the Lord has blessed me with is an ability to read people very well. Personally, I think a lot of that happened when I was a kid, when Minnie used to be my jailer, that I could read her every move and know what was coming. And then when I got out and I was running the party life, that I, with all the need to watch what people were doing and know who was up to what and who the violent ones were and who the ones were that would and who the ones were that wouldn't, and all this kind of thing. So when my wife walked into my shop, and I'm in a sign business, so when people walk into my shop, I get usually a very good sense of what they want. And somehow that impressed my wife, because I was able to give her exactly what she wanted, and she was European, and she knew that I knew my stuff. So I met her, and it's been a long challenge, because she's from a completely different family than I am. She grew up with 7 siblings in a home where everyone stuck up for each other and cared for each other, and I lived behind the wall that I built for myself. And I have still, even after this time, I'm like still trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong, but I think a lot of people do. Everyone's got their own story, and everyone's trying to figure out their own way, and everyone's got those quirks and things that make them odd. I don't think I'm so different after all in the grand scheme of things, but I do find certain things challenging. So, kind of in conclusion, I want to talk about the 3 things that, the songs that we sang today, they all talk about faith and love and hope. And my favorite saying is in Christ alone I put my trust, because I got nothing going on here. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing that I can do. I am not in control of anything. I can to some extent, I've learned to self-control, which is one of those things in the Bible that the Lord talks about. But at the end of the day, when I walk out the door and I drive somewhere, I know that I might not come back. I know when I lay down at night, I think, Lord, just please let me wake up again in the morning. I would like another day to see what I can do for you, because our mortality is so frail and small, and of our own devices, we are inherently evil. We are selfish to the nth degree. Even still today, I mean, there's always been struggle, and there always will be struggle. And if you're in a world today where you're struggling with drugs, that's just the struggle that you're in. And if you're in a world where you're struggling with relationships, that's the struggle you're in. Today, I'm in different struggles. I'm in struggles where I have to learn to keep my mouth quiet. I'm in struggles where I have to learn to remain calm in spite of adversity. I'm in struggles where, that idiot on Facebook who hasn't got a clue what he's talking about, I'd like to give him a piece of my mind, but you know what? I'm not going to say anything. We have different struggles now. I still struggle with the idea of love. I believe, and I'm sure that I love my children and my wife. But I have doubts, because I'm like, is this really love? And then you talk to people, love isn't really a feeling. Love is about, changing diapers at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever. Like love is all those things where you don't give up. Love is those things where, even though you really, really just want to get like a big stick of dynamite and blow the entire house up, you're just going to calmly bring your wife a cup of tea. Those are the things I struggle with now. And because as I want to improve, who I am as a man, where I want to go with. So my faith as a kid, I knew there was a God. He was all around me. My faith as a teen, I struggled, and it was so hard because the world drew me in. My faith as a young man, well, I knew there was still a God, and I knew that He was calling me as the prodigal son. And my faith now is sort of one that I want to build and do better for the Lord. My love as a kid didn't exist. My love as a teen was purely made up in the arms of a girl. And as a young man, it was the same. I didn't understand love until Eric was born. Love now is a precarious thing at best. I want to love, and I'm aware that the Lord loves me, but I still struggle with it, because for half of my life, or more or less, I don't know, I didn't love. So now here I'm 57 years old, and I'm questioning myself. Do I really love people or not? I don't know. It's weird, but this is my story, and this is where I am. My hope as a kid, I had no hope. So if you look at it, I had no love and I had no hope, but I had faith. My faith as a teen, or my hope as a teen, I don't know what my hope was as a teen. My hope was, I guess my hope as a teen was for the struggle to end. Maybe that's why I went off the deep end. My hope as a young man in those days, my only hope was that I was going to survive this mess, because I knew if I was going to die, the Lord was going to be awfully mad at me and I would pay for it. And my hope now is that I can just, everyone wants to be redeemed. Everyone wants to live better, but my hope now is that I can do His will, at least for the rest of my life, and be of service to Him. And I always say, if there's one person who will change their ways and avoid the rat trap because of something that I've said, it was worth it. I have always said that if you're in a place in life where you meet somebody on the street and they ask you a question, if you don't give them the right answer today, that could change their life. And who knows, they could be president or they could be nobody. I don't know. But it's important what we do today with our lives. So that's my story for today. I don't know how long I went on. I wasn't watching the clock. But I thank you all for listening. And I guess what I'll do is I'll just close in prayer, and I think we'll have a couple more songs, and God be with us all. So, Lord, I thank you for the day that you have given us. I thank you for the life that you have given us. I thank you today once again for freeing me from the mire. I thank you for the life that I have. I pray, Lord, that whoever these words reach might have hope and have faith, if they don't have any already, that they might feel love. I'm grateful for what you have given to me, Lord, and I just pray that each of us would look to you as we go forward and try our best. We often fail. We look to your Spirit's guidance to give us strength and courage and to submit to. But the Lord, do have mercy on us, I pray, and forgive us, and allow us another day to make an effort and bring the word to those who are lost. There are so many who didn't know you or don't know you the way I did, even if it was a twisted way. Lord, we just, I think those of us who are serving you want to rescue other souls and be a part of your salvation story through Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.